In the peaceful village of Odu, nestled between rolling hills and sparkling river, there were two sisters, Ifeoma and Deborah. Ifeoma, the older of the two, was known for her gentle heart and the kindness she showed everyone she met. She had a warm smile that could brighten anyone's day. Deborah, the younger sister, was full of life and laughter. She was beautiful, with a skin the color of rich cocoa and eyes that sparkled like stars. The sisters were very close and shared everything from their deepest secrets to their wildest dreams. As Ifeoma grew older, her parents arranged for her to marry a man named Ebube. Ebube was a strong and handsome farmer who worked hard every day in the fields. He loved Ifeoma from the moment he saw her, and they quickly became the happiest couple in the village. They built a cozy home together, surrounded by colorful flowers and fruit trees. The only thing missing from their lives were the sound of children's laughter. Ifeoma and Ebube both longed for a child, and they prayed to gods every night, hoping for a blessing. Years passed, and Ifeoma remained childless. The joy in their home began to fade as the pressure from the village and Ebube's family grew stronger. In Odu, having children was seen as a sign of God's favor. Without a child, Ifeoma felt incomplete, and the villagers whispered amongst themselves only deepened. They began to wonder why the gods had not blessed Ifeoma with a child. Some even suggested that she might have angered the spirit in some way. The pressure weighed heavily on Ebube as well. His family, especially his mother, began urging him to take another wife, believing that a new wife might give him the children he longed for. Ebube loved Ifeoma dearly and didn't want to hurt her, but the constant pressure from his family made him restless and distant. Ifeoma could see the worry in Ebube's eyes, and it broke her heart. She loved him so much and couldn't bear the thought of him marrying another woman. She prayed more fervently every day, begging the gods to bless her with a child. But the gods remained silent, and Ifeoma's fear grew. One evening, Ifeoma sat alone in their small home, tears streaming down her face. She knew she had to do something to save her marriage. That night, as the moonlight filtered through the windows, Ifeoma thought of her younger sister, Deborah. Deborah was engaged to the prince of Odu, a king and handsome man named Ola. Deborah was excited about her future and dreamed of living in the palace, surrounded by luxury and love. Ifeoma knew she was asking for a great sacrifice, but she had no other choice. The next morning, Ifeoma went to visit Deborah. She found her sister sitting by the river, her bare feet dangling in the cool water. Deborah was humming a song tune as she braided her long black hair. When she saw Ifeoma, she smiled and waved her over, but as soon as Deborah saw the sadness in her sister's eyes, her smile faded. "Ifeoma, what's wrong?" Deborah asked. Her voice filled with concern. Ifeoma sat down beside her sister and took a deep breath. "Deborah, I need to talk to you about something important," she said quietly. "You know how much I love Ebube, but I can't have children. His family is pressuring him to take another wife, and I am scared. I don't want to lose him." Deborah's eyes widened with shock. "Ifeoma, no! Ebube loves you. He wouldn't do that." Ifeoma shook her head sadly. "I don't know, Deborah. The pressure is growing every day. I need your help. I need you to bear children for Ebube, to save my marriage and our family's honor." Deborah's heart sank. She loved her sister more than anything, but the thought of giving up her future with the prince was too painful to bear. She couldn't believe what Ifeoma was asking of her. "Ifeoma, I don't know if I can do that. I love Ola, and we have our own future to think about." Ifeoma's eyes filled with tears as she pleaded with Deborah. "Please, Deborah, I am your sister, and I need your help. Our families will be shamed if Ebube marries another woman. I cannot bear to lose him. You are my only hope." Deborah was torn. She loved her sister and didn't want to see her suffer. But the thought of giving up her love for the prince was unbearable. For days, Deborah struggled with the decision, her heart heavy with sorrow. She knew what was right for herself, but the weight of her sister's plea was too much to ignore. Their mother, Ifeoma, also spoke to Deborah, urging her to consider the family's honor. "Deborah, my child," Ifeoma said, "sometimes we must make sacrifices for those we love. Ifeoma is in great pain, And if we do nothing, our family will be shamed. The gods will look kindly upon you for a sacrifice. Deborah spent many sleepless nights, tossing and turning as she thought about what to do. She loved her sister dearly, but the thought of leaving Ola, the man she had fallen deeply in love with, was almost too much to bear. She could already picture the life she had with him, a life filled with happiness, children, and a loving home in the palace. But each time she thought of Ifeoma alone and heartbroken, her resolve began to crumble. Finally, after many tears and sleepless nights, Deborah made her decisions. She would sacrifice her own happiness for the sake of her sister. It was the hardest decision she had ever made, but she knew in her heart that it was the right thing to do. With tears in her eyes, she went to Ifeoma and told her that she would bear children for Ebube. Ifeoma was overwhelmed with gratitude and relief. She hugged Deborah tightly, thanking her over and over again. Deborah's sacrifice would save her marriage and protect their family's honor. But even as Ifeoma smiled through her tears, a small voice in the back of her mind wondered if she was making a mistake. Deborah went to see Ola, the prince, and told him her decision. Ola was heartbroken, but he respected Deborah's choice, understanding the deep love she had for her family. She held her close, promising that he would cherish the memories they had together. With a heavy heart, Deborah moved into Ifeoma and Ebube's home. She tried her best to be cheerful, but deep down she was filled with sorrow. Soon, Deborah became pregnant, and the entire household was filled with excitement. Ebube, who had been distant and troubled, became overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a father. He began to shower Deborah with love and attention, ensuring that she had everything she needed. But as Ebube's affection for Deborah began to grow, Ifeoma began to feel a deep pang of jealousy. She had sacrificed so much for her husband, yet she felt as though she was losing him to her own sister. Ifeoma watched as Ebube brought Deborah gifts, helped her with chores, and spent long hours talking to her. The bitterness in Ifeoma's heart grew each day. One afternoon, Ifeoma found Deborah resting in the shade of a tree, her hands gently caressing her growing belly. The sight filled Ifeoma with a deep, unshakable envy. That evening, Ifeoma made Deborah do all the housework, even though she was heavily pregnant. Deborah, with her kind and gentle nature, did not complain. She loved her sister and wanted to help her, even though it pained her to see Ifeoma so unhappy. Ifeoma, Deborah said one day, her voice soft and worried, I think Ebube should spend more time with you. I never meant to take him away from you. Ifeoma nodded, but the jealousy in her heart did not fade. No matter how much time Ebube spent with her, she couldn't shake the feeling that Deborah was stealing her husband's love. As the months passed, Deborah's pregnancy brought joy to the household, but the tension between the sisters grew stronger. The villagers began to notice the strain in Ifeoma and Deborah's relationship, but no one dared to speak of it. Ifeoma's heart had turned cold, and her treatment of Deborah became harsher with each passing day. One evening, Ifeoma could no longer contain her anger. She confronted Deborah, accusing her of trying to steal Ebube's love. You think you are so special, don't you? Ifeoma spat, her voice filled with venom. You think you can just waltz into my home and take everything I have worked so hard for? Well, I won't let you. Deborah, shocked by her sister's words, tried to calm her down. Ifeoma, please, she said softly. I never wanted to take anything from you. I did this because I love you, and I wanted to help you. Ebube still loves you, but you must not let jealousy destroy what we have. But Ifeoma was beyond reason, blinded by her jealousy and anger. She made a decision that would change their lives forever. The next morning, while Deborah was out gathering herbs, Ifeoma packed all her sister's belongings and threw them outside. When Deborah returned home, tired and heavy with pregnancy, she found her things scattered on the ground. With a sinking heart, Deborah picked up her belongings and went to find Ifeoma. Sister, she said, her voice trembling, why have you done this? What have I done to deserve this? Ifeoma, her face cold and unyielding, replied, I don't want you here anymore. You have served your purpose. Now leave and never return. The word hit Deborah like a blow. She had given up everything for Ifeoma, and now she's being cast out like a stranger. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to reason with her sister, but Ifeoma would not listen. With no other choice, Deborah gathered her things and prepared to leave. As Deborah walked away from the home she had sacrificed so much for, the sky grew dark and the wind began to howl. She turned around one last time, her heart breaking, and cursed her sister. "May the gods judge you for your cruelty, Ifeoma," Deborah cried out, her voice filled with pain. "May you know the sorrow you have brought upon me. I curse this house and all who dwell within it. No happiness shall come to you, and your days shall be filled with regrets." The villagers who had gathered to witness the scene watched in silence as Deborah, pregnant and broken-hearted, left the village with nowhere to go. The once happy home was now filled with sorrow, and bond between the sisters scattered beyond repair. As Deborah disappeared into distance, the wind carried her curses across the village. The people of Odu knew that the gods were watching, and they feared what might come next. Ifeoma, now alone with her jealousy and regrets, would soon learn the true cost of her actions. Days turned into weeks, and Ifeoma began to feel the weight of her sister's curse. The happiness that once filled her home had vanished, replaced by a heavy dark cloud. Ebube, who had once been overjoyed at the thought of becoming a father, grew distant and cold. He rarely spoke to Ifeoma, and when he did, his words were sharp and filled with anger. He missed Deborah and could not understand why Ifeoma had driven her away. Ifeoma tried to reach out to Ebube, but he pushed her away. The love that had once bound them together seemed to have disappeared. Ifeoma's heart ached with loneliness, but she was too proud to admit that she had made a mistake. Instead, she buried her pain deep inside, hoping that time would heal the wounds. But the gods were not so forgiving. Ifeoma's nights were filled with nightmares, and she would often wake up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding with fear. She dreamed of Deborah, alone and suffering, wandering through the wilderness with no one to help her. In her dreams, Deborah's voice echoed in her mind, repeating the curse over and over again. Ifeoma tried to ignore the nightmares, but they grew more intense, and with each passing night, she could no longer sleep, and the lack of rest began to take its toll on her health. Her once beautiful face became pale and gaunt, and her eyes lost their sparkle. The villagers noticed the change in her appearance and began to whisper amongst themselves. They believed that the gods were punishing Ifeoma for her actions, and they feared that the curse would soon spread to the rest of the village. One day, as Ifeoma was walking through the village market, she overheard a group of women talking about a strange sickness that had begun to spread amongst the children. The women spoke in hushed tones, afraid that the sickness was a sign of the gods' displeasure. Ifeoma's heart sank as she listened to their words. She knew that the sickness was as a result of Deborah's curse, and the guilt weighed heavily on her soul. She wanted to keep the children, but she was too ashamed to face the villagers. She retreated to her home, where she spent her days in solitude, haunted by the consequence of her actions. Meanwhile, Deborah wandered through the wilderness, her belly heavy with the child she carried. She had nowhere to go and nowhere to turn to. She missed her family and the life she had once known, but the pain of Ifeoma's betrayal was too much to bear. Deborah knew that she could not return to Odu, for she had cursed the village and her sister in the moments of anger. As the months passed, Deborah's pregnancy grew more difficult. She struggled to find food and shelter, and the weight of her unborn child became a heavy burden. But Deborah was so determined to survive, for the sake of the life growing inside her. One stormy night, as lightning struck through the crowd, Deborah was in labor. Alone and in pain, she gave birth to a baby boy under the shelter of a large tree. The rain poured down around her, washing away the blood and tears. Deborah cradled her newborn in her arms, her heart filled with a mixture of love and sorrow. The child was beautiful, with dark eyes that reminded Deborah of the prince she had loved and lost. She named him Ayo, meaning joy, hoping that he would bring light to her dark world. Deborah knew that she could not stay in the wilderness forever. She needed to find a place for her son, away from the curse that had destroyed her life. With Ayo wrapped in a cloth, Deborah set out on a journey to find a new home. She traveled for days, her feet blistered and sore, but she pressed on, driven by the love she had for her son. Finally, after many days of wandering, Deborah came upon a small village nestled in the hills. The villagers welcomed Deborah with open arms, offering her food and shelter. They were kind and generous, and Deborah soon found a place amongst them. She began to rebuild her life, finding joy in the simple pleasure. Ayo grew stronger and healthy, and his laughter filled the air with happiness. Back in Odu, the curse continued to take its toll. The sickness that had spread amongst the village grew worse, and the villagers began to grow desperate. They sought the help of healers and priests, but nothing seemed to work. The villagers believed that the gods were angry, and they began to lose hope. Ifeoma too was suffering. Her health had deteriorated to the point where she could barely leave her bed. She was plagued with nightmares and visions of her sister and the child she had never met. Ifeoma knew that she had brought this suffering upon herself, and she longed for a way to make things right. One night, as Ifeoma lay awake in her bed, she heard a voice in the darkness. It was soft and soothing, like the sound of a gentle breeze. The voice called her name, and Ifeoma knew at once that it was Deborah. Ifeoma, the voice whispered, "I forgive you." Ifeoma's heart ached with relief as she listened to the voice. "Deborah," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotions, "I'm sorry. I was wrong, and I had paid the price for my actions." The voice was silent for a moment, and then it spoke again. "There is still time to make things right, Ifeoma. Go to the place where the river meets the tree, and there you will find the one who can lift the curse." Ifeoma's heart raced as she listened to the voice. She knew that this was her only chance to redeem herself and save the village. Despite her weakened state, Ifeoma gathered all the strength she had left and set out the journey to the palace where the rivers meet the trees. The journey was long, and Ifeoma's body ached with every step, but she was determined to find the one who could lift the curse. After many days of walking, Ifeoma finally arrived at the place the voice had described. There she found an old woman sitting by the river bank, her eyes closed in meditation. Ifeoma approached the old woman, her voice trembling with desperation. "Please help me," she begged. "I have wronged my sister, and now my village is suffering because of it. I need your help to lift the curse." The old woman opened her eyes and looked at Ifeoma with a deep understanding. "I know of the curse that had befallen your village," she said softly. "But to lift it, you must make amends with your sister. You must ask for her forgiveness and offer her the love that you once took away." Ifeoma nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I will do anything to make things right," she promised. The old woman smiled gently. "Then go to your sister and let your heart guide you." With renewed determination, Ifeoma set out to find Deborah. She traveled across the hills and through the forest, her heart filled with hope. After many days of searching, Ifeoma finally arrived at the village where Deborah had made a new home. When Ifeoma saw Deborah, she could hardly believe her eyes. Her sister was sitting under a tree, playing with a little boy who looked just like the prince. Ifeoma's heart swelled with love and guilt as she watched them. Deborah looked up and saw Ifeoma standing there, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Then without a word, Ifeoma fell to her knees and began to weep. "Deborah, I am sorry," she cried. "I have wronged you in ways that I cannot even begin to describe. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I beg you to lift the curse and save our village." Deborah's eyes filled with tears as she listened to her sister's words. She had never stopped loving Ifeoma, despite everything that had happened. Slowly, Deborah walked over to Ifeoma and knelt down beside her. She took her sister's hands in her own and squeezed them gently. "Ifeoma," Deborah said softly, "I forgave you a long time ago. The curse was born out of pain, but it is time for it to end. You are my sister, and I love you. Let us heal together." Ifeoma looked up at Deborah, her eyes filled with gratitude and relief. "Thank you, Deborah," she whispered. Deborah smiled and pulled Ifeoma into a warm embrace. As they held each other, the darkness that had plagued Ifeoma's heart began to lift. The curse was broken, and the bond between the sisters was mended. With Deborah's forgiveness, the sickness that had spread through Odu began to fade. The children recovered, and the village returned to its former peace. Ifeoma and Deborah were reunited, and they lived together in harmony, raising Ayo as their own. The love between the sisters grew stronger each day, and the gods smiled upon them once more. From that day forward, The people of Odu never forget the lesson of the two sisters. They learned that jealousy and anger could destroy even the strongest of bonds, but forgiveness and love could heal even the deepest of wounds.